them free, but without the equipment, any lifting gear or any real metal poles, it's difficult. Tenzing Sherpa saw the accident itself.
Because they're trying to land, but near the edge, there one of the small houses and the little stone and the backside the wheel. First, the wheels break and they come down and the couples and they crash down there.
So the wheels caught a house?
Yeah.
The dead and injured were then flown out in a Nepali army helicopter. Tom Heap, BBC News, Everest Base Camp.
In Indonesia, a key witness has told a Jakarta court that he was involved in the Bali bombings last year, in which more than 200 people were killed. The man, known as Mukhlas, is one of 4 Bali suspects giving evidence in a separate trial, that of an Indonesian Islamic cleric, Abu Bakar Bashir, who is accused of treason. Mukhlas told the court that he was one of a small group of people involved in the Bali bombings. He said Abu Bakar Bashir knew nothing about the attacks. The cleric isn't a suspect in the Bali bombings themselves. He's accused of giving the go-ahead for a series of fatal church bombings in 2000. Our correspondent Rachel Harvey was in the courtroom in Jakarta.
It's been a fairly dramatic day all round, to be honest, and it's built up from fairly inauspicious beginnings. The first suspect, Ali Imran, who's Mukhlas's kid brother, he was quite reticent. Every now and again he'd let out a bit of a giggle, but beyond that he had to be pushed quite hard in his questioning. He did in the end say that he knew Jamaat Islamiyah, this Islamic extremist group, existed. In fact, he said that he was a member, but he didn't know what Abu Bakar Bashir's role in the organisation was. The next witness, who was called Mubarak, similar answers, different circumstances. He was saying he was elsewhere in Indonesia, but again, he had a handler, as he called him, who told him that Abu Bakar Bashir was in charge, but he didn't know that himself personally. Then we had Mukhlas, who arrived to huge cheers of Allahu Akbar, God is great, from his supporters outside the court. He gave a clenched fist salute, a huge grin on his face, and for the next couple of hours in court, he was cracking jokes, avoiding direct questions about Jamaat Islamiyah, but he did say, as you said in your introduction, that he was involved in the Bali bombings. He answered it in answer to a question where he was asked, well, what role did Abu Bakar Bashir play? And he said, well, he'd had nothing to do with bombs. This was just us, just a small group.
Rachel Harvey reporting. The human rights organisation Amnesty International says governments are using the war on terror as an excuse to abuse human rights. The organisation's annual report says the response to the September 11th attacks has made the world more dangerous by curtailing human rights and shielding governments from scrutiny. Amnesty International says the detention by the US of over 600 people at the Guantanamo Bay military camp is a human rights scandal. The prisoners are being held without charge or trial. It warns that Iraq could go the way of Afghanistan if no effort is made to restore law and order and respect human rights. And the report says Russia is carrying out serious human rights violations in Chechnya and is routinely using torture to extract confessions.
Amnesty International claims the war on terror is being used as an excuse to trample on human rights. It says that despite the huge sums being spent on security, people around the world are feeling more insecure than at any time since the end of the Cold War. In particular, it attacks the United States for holding more than 600 people without trial in Guantanamo Bay. It wants them charged or released immediately. Britain too is condemned for keeping 11 foreign terrorist suspects locked up in high-security jails, again without being charged. Amnesty says these are inhuman or degrading conditions.
Around the world, governments, particularly repressive regimes, have used the war against terrorism as a license to intensify their repression of political opponents, of dissidents in China, in Egypt, in Philippines. Around the world, we see a rolling back of civil liberties in a way that we have never seen before.
Today's report also highlights what it calls the forgotten victims of human rights abuses in countries beyond the media spotlight. And it says that in Afghanistan, millions of people still face an uncertain future because of a lack of long-term investment and the failure to create a functioning legal and judicial system that respects human rights. It warns there's a very real risk that Iraq will face similar problems. Andy Tai, BBC News.
In a surprising intervention, European Commission President Romano Prodi has criticised the new draft constitution for the European Union. He said the contents were disappointing, unambitious, and in some respects a step backward. The text was published over the past few days by the Convention on the Future of Europe. Mr. Prodi called for the draft to be amended. And here's what's coming up. How the Chinese government's propaganda machine is trying to face down public anger over the SARS crisis. Find out more after this break.
Because a mother's eyes can't be everywhere, we're developing cars that can see. It's our vision of accident-free driving.
Here I am again, and we'll move on with the headlines. Iranian leaders warn the United States to stop threatening their country. President Khatami says Iraq must decide its own future. 2 people are killed after a helicopter crashes on Mount Everest. And here's Aaron now with the business news.
Thanks a lot, Nisha. Let's talk those currencies. The euro has slipped back a few points, but it's still at very high levels against the dollar. Now, on Tuesday, you may remember, the single currency hit an all-time high against the greenback. Now, the euro surged through the $1.19 mark, and the strong currency is certainly making life more difficult for Europe's exporters. Meanwhile, manufacturing confidence in France has remained at a 14-month low in May, I should say, and the European Central Bank is now widely expected to try to offset the impact of the euro's rise by cutting interest rates at its next council meeting on the 5th of June. Staying in Europe, and unemployment in Ireland rose 4.6% in the first quarter of the year. That's compared to 4.4% a year earlier. Certainly as the global slowdown takes its toll, unemployment is forecast to reach 5.5% next year. From the highs in the 1980s, unemployment fell to very low levels in the late 1990s, certainly in the Celtic Tiger boom, when Ireland even had to import workers. Again, staying within the Eurozone, and there's been widespread disruption in France after tens of thousands of workers took to the streets to protest against the government's proposed pension reforms. On Tuesday, most flights to and from France were cancelled as air traffic controllers went on strike. Now, they were joined by teachers and postal workers, all of whom want to renegotiate a reform that would raise the number of years people must work to receive a full pension. But the centre-right government has refused to amend its draft bill and will present it to the Cabinet this Wednesday in preparation for a National Assembly debate next month. Let's go and take a look at those markets. US markets are open, Wall Street open and trading now. We were going to say both rising. The Nasdaq's fallen a little, though certainly buoyed by optimism that the growth, of course, in the world's largest economy will accelerate, certainly boosting those corporate profits. Costco Wholesale, Toll Brothers and Krispy Kreme Donuts. Yum. They're all seeing good gains there. All back to you.
Thank you, Aaron. The Chinese government's attempted cover-up of the SARS epidemic, at least initially, has been likened to the former Soviet Union's management of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. In both cases, public confidence was shaken over a major health threat. But has this made the Chinese government reconsider? From Beijing, Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports.
The corridors of Long Mei's apartment building are haunted by SARS. In early April, behind this door, her neighbours suddenly began falling ill. Within a week, 2 of them were dead. A few days later, her own husband fell ill.
When I learned my husband had SARS, I didn't believe it. And the health minister on TV said there were only 5 cases in Beijing, but there were more than that in my building alone.
It's not just the likes of Long Mei who were angered by the way the Chinese government covered up the extent of the SARS outbreak. Here in Beijing, the streets were literally deserted for 2 weeks as the city's population fled home and locked the door. The government was suddenly confronted by widespread popular anger. Faced with this serious crisis of confidence, how has the Chinese government responded? As only a one-party state can, with mass propaganda. The Communist Party has declared war on SARS. Its senior leaders are shown nightly on television news, visiting the front lines in this new war.
This is not new. This is old. We're seeing this in a similar respect in the new leadership at press conferences, forthright, outspoken, speaking frankly. But that's not structural change. That's not political change. That's all propaganda. I don't think we're seeing in this leadership a recognition that their system is at fault.
In place of reform, the Communist Party is turning to another tried and tested formula: nationalism. Here on the Great Wall outside Beijing, the fight against SARS is being turned into a patriotic campaign. The anti-SARS kite flying may have been a bit of a flop, but that's not the point. This is about building confidence.
We very much feel confident. Very soon, all of this SARS problem will go away.
That is of little consolation to Long Mei. She sits at home alone, waiting for news of her husband. He remains on the critical list.
SARS should be a lesson to the government, and the media shouldn't stay just a mouthpiece for the Communist Party.
But that's exactly what it continues to be. The crescendo of propaganda drowning out any question of the Communist Party's role in covering up the SARS epidemic. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, Beijing.
Let's return now to the news which came through in the last half hour or so, that President Bush will be holding 2 summits in the Middle East, one in Egypt and one in Jordan. In Washington, with more details, is the BBC's John Lyne. Sounds like an ambitious programme, John.
That's right. President Bush is going to go on from the Group of 8 summit, the 8 leading powers summit in France in Evian, and is going to go on to the Middle East and hold a sort of twin-headed summit. The first one is in the Egyptian resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, and that's where the Arab leaders will be gathered. We don't have a full cast list yet, but I think we can predict, roughly speaking, it'll be the Egyptians, the Saudis, perhaps the Jordanians, and a few other moderate friends of the United States. And then he'll go on to Aqaba, just a few miles down the road, really, which is a Jordanian resort, Jordanian port, and there he will host Ariel Sharon, the Israeli Prime Minister, and Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, the new Palestinian Prime Minister. It's a slightly clumsy arrangement, the reason being that I think Egypt doesn't want to be hosting Ariel Sharon because of the way he's been acting in the West Bank and Gaza recently, or, depending on who you speak to, Ariel Sharon doesn't want to go to Egypt.
Briefly, it's quite interesting, isn't it, that President Bush himself is going to the region at such an early stage of the roadmap process?
It is very interesting. It's something he's totally avoided up until now, but everybody in Washington, everybody close to the White House saying, look, the president has really got interested in this. He's deeply engaged in the Middle East peace process in a way that he criticized President Clinton for before, but he's now engaged himself. He wants to use his own personal prestige to move the process forward.
John in Washington, thank you. David Brenner joins us with the sports news.
Isha, thanks very much indeed. I'll start with the latest news from day 3 of the French Open at Stade Roland-Garros in Paris. And a marathon 3-setter that finished a little earlier provided quite an upset too, with the 9th seed Daniela Hantuchova knocked out by the American Ashley Harkleroad, and that after Hantuchova had pulled back from 3-5 down and survived 2 Harkleroad service games for the match in the 3rd to lead 6-5 at one point. We're joining Harkleroad in round 3, Paddy Schneider of Switzerland and Japan's Ai Sugiyama. And another surprise in the men's singles too, where the unseeded Brazilian Flavio Sareta knocked out the former champion Yevgeny Kafelnikov in 5 sets. The Russian, seeded 17, who won here in 1996, always playing catch-up in this match. Meanwhile, the 11th seed Rainer Schittler of Germany recovered from losing the first set. He's beaten the Frenchman Jean-René Lizenard. And also through to round 3, the number 23 seed Younes El Anoui of Morocco. He beat Christophe Rochou of Belgium in straight sets. Well, now to football, and the English city of Manchester has been taken over by thousands of Italian fans ahead of the Champions League final later tonight. The home of the English champions, Manchester United, Old Trafford plays host as Juventus take on Milan for the biggest prize in European football.
Souvenir T-shirt and paper, £1.
Around 50,000 Italian fans are expected in Manchester for tonight's game. Many of them are already enjoying the sunshine, cafes and bars of the city centre. For most, this is their first experience of Mancunian hospitality.
Very friendly people and good bars, and yeah, had a couple of beers and everything is, yeah, I like the atmosphere.
Very nice, but the pub closed very early.
I'm emotional. I'm very emotional for this night. I hope to have a party after the match.
And this is where all those fans in the city centre are going to be coming to. Old Trafford, Manchester United's home ground, the venue for tonight's final. Juventus and AC Milan, the first time two Italian teams have contested this final, and they'll be very eager to prove that the death of Italian football has been greatly exaggerated. Juventus are the cup favourites. They recently clinched the Italian league title and knocked out Real Madrid in the semi-final. Some are saying that AC Milan are lucky to be here, but try telling their players that. Come on! An exciting game's in prospect tonight, but goals might be easy to come by in the park this afternoon. Gordon Farker, BBC News, Manchester.
Still haven't got a clue what that last shot's all about, but there you go, Nisha, that's it.
Neither have I, David, thank you. One bit of news that's just come through before I go. Let me tell you that former Beatles Sir Paul McCartney, well, he's going to have a baby. His wife, Heather, is apparently pregnant with the couple's first baby. And more seriously, a reminder of the main news before I go. From Iran, the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei says the Islamic Republic won't bow to threats from the US. He accused Washington of trying to strip Iran of its values. It follows a threat from the US Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld to Iran not to meddle in affairs in Iraq. Thanks for joining us.
Hello and welcome to our world weather. Starting in the Gulf states, where we will see plenty more fine, dry weather with more sunshine. Just a bit of a brisk breeze blowing through central parts of Saudi Arabia. You see the clear skies on the satellite picture at the minute. Also across much of India, but we've just got a dark area of cloud from Bangladesh into Myanmar. A more speckly cloud in the southeast of the Arabian Sea. The first hints that the monsoon is on its way. Now we'll see a few showers pushing into Kerala across Sri Lanka. Elsewhere, the heat will continue. We could see the odd thundery shower or dust storm pushing into parts of Punjab and also Rajasthan. Now, if we leave behind India and that showery cloud in the Arabian Sea, we will see more showers edging into eastern Kenya, perhaps into Tanzania, some heavy downpours. You see the expanse of cloud across the tropical regions through central parts of Africa. We've also got heavy downpours for southern and eastern parts of Europe. The lightning strikes from earlier on, pulling across much of the eastern Mediterranean, bringing some heavy downpours of rain. But it looks like for Iberia, there'll be more warm sunshine. Moving over to France, the United Kingdom, temperatures will be on the rise. For Canada, though, temperatures falling away as we pick up northerly winds through Ontario. We will see wet weather moving down towards the Great Lakes, pushing into the Midwest, and that will gradually seep away towards the east coast. For South America, we should have lighter winds around the River Plate area and also some fine dry weather over the next couple of days. Fine and dry for much of Australia, but we've got a weather front nudging into the southwest corner, bringing some rain to Perth. We've also had heavy downpours of rain in the Philippines, Manila having over 300 millimetres in the past few days. All this wet weather is thanks to a tropical depression. Now that's going to make its way northwards, Lympha pushing up towards western parts of Japan. Now we can see another area of cloud, this moving in towards Korea. That's going to bring some very heavy rain. Moving across North Korea on Thursday, gradually creeping southeastwards. It will meet up against the warm air affected by Lympha, and then we're going to see some very stormy weather pushing into western Japan.
Asia Today, next on BBC World.
Passageways. Opening on new worlds of opportunity. Linking what is with what can be. The world is open for business. And you have the key. Diners Club International.
Introducing Intel Centrino mobile technology. The new wireless laptop technology designed to help you untangle, unburden, and unwire your life.
Now on BBC World Asia Today with Keshni Navaratnam.
Hello and a very warm welcome to Asia Today. I'm Keshni Navaratnam. In this programme, the diplomatic thaw continues as Lambad names its new High Commissioner to Delhi. Everest danger, 3 people die in a helicopter crash at base camp. And a key witness at a trial in Indonesia has admitted to being involved in the Bali bombings last year. Pakistan has formally named its new High Commissioner to India. He's the Foreign Ministry spokesman, Aziz Ahmed Khan. Islamabad says that India has accepted Mr. Khan's nomination. It's the latest step by the nuclear-armed rivals to improve relations. They came close to war last year. The news follows India's announcement that it would resume bus services with Pakistan as part of confidence-building measures between the neighbours. Delhi has already named Shiv Shankar Menon as its new High Commissioner to Islamabad. The Indian Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee is in Germany on the first leg of a week-long European tour. Mr. Vajpayee is due to hold talks with the German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, in which the fight against terrorism and regional stability are high on the agenda. Mr. Vajpayee will attend an informal summit in France on Friday between the G8 group of leading industrial nations and 12 developing countries. Well, speaking to members of the Indian community in Berlin, Mr. Vajpayee said that India had to be prepared if the current peace initiative with Pakistan failed.
Sometimes people don't understand how peace and war go together. But the world is full of such contradictions. We want peace, but if peace doesn't happen, we must be prepared.
At least 20 people were injured in Nepal when police used batons and tear gas to break up a demonstration by about 5,000 opposition supporters. The protesters were heading for the Parliament building in the capital, Kathmandu. A number of former MPs were amongst the marchers. The march was called off over King Gyanendra's decision last year to sack the elected government, assume executive powers and install his own government. Well, back now to our top story and the naming by Pakistan of its new High Commissioner to Delhi. Our correspondent Zafar Abbas now joins me live from Islamabad via a video phone. Zafar, there was initially some confusion about this appointment, wasn't there, when Prime Minister Jamali named a different person earlier to the actual nomination?
Absolutely, there was a lot of confusion. It started with speculations in the local media about who is likely to be the High Commissioner. And then Prime Minister Jamali, in an interview to one of the Indian channels, gave a name which was different from what we now know. He had mentioned Pakistan's current ambassador to China to be the next High Commissioner, but later on it was denied, and we don't know what really is the background, why this name was mentioned at this time. But the Pakistani Foreign Ministry now maintains that Riaz Muhammad Khan was never to be the High Commissioner, and now a very seasoned diplomat, probably equally experienced as Riaz Muhammad Khan, Mr. Aziz Ahmad Khan, has been named as the new High Commissioner.
Well, some observers are speaking of something of a power struggle between the Prime Minister Zafarullah Jamali and, of course, the President.
Well, I really don't think any kind of power struggle is going on at the moment. There can be different perceptions to who is going to be or who should have been the High Commissioner. But both the people, the one who was mentioned by Prime Minister Jamali and the one who has been appointed, are career diplomat, are seasoned members of the Pakistani diplomatic corps. So it doesn't seem to be the case that it was part of the power struggle. It seems that probably Prime Minister Jamali in a way went out of the normal protocol to name the High Commissioner even before the name was approved by New Delhi, and that created some kind of a diplomatic crisis over here. And even if Riaz Muhammad Khan was to be the High Commissioner, his name was withdrawn, and Mr. Aziz Ahmad Khan's name was then sent to Delhi, which was approved by the Indian government, and now he has been named as the new High Commissioner.
Briefly, Zafar, now that the ambassadors to both Delhi and Islamabad have been named, what's the next step? Could there be a resumption of talks?
Well, the first crucial phase has been completed. The two High Commissioners will shortly be taking over their assignments in Delhi and Islamabad. Some confidence-building measures have already started, exchange of prisoners, the announcement that they are likely to restore the travel links, even the bus service between the two countries. But beyond that, nothing substantive has taken place at the moment. So once the two High Commissioners are in place, probably there will be more progress on establishing or trying to normalize relations, and only then the step will come for the start of a formal dialogue. So we can see that at least a few weeks, if not months, may take place before this normalization process really moves on in the form of a dialogue between the two countries.
Zafar Abbas in Islamabad, thank you. A fatal helicopter crash has marred the 50th anniversary celebrations of the conquest of Mount Everest by Tenzing Norgay and Sir Edmund Hillary. 2 people were killed and 6 were injured when the Russian-built helicopter crashed on the perimeter of base camp earlier today. The helicopter, which was carrying 9 people, was on its way to pick up climbers who had reached the summit earlier this week. Well, our correspondent Jane Hughes was at Mount Everest base camp when the accident happened.
Well, we saw it happen. We were standing right where I'm standing now, and the helicopter passed by this way and then went back behind, and we saw it drop over the ridge and then this great cloud of smoke come up. And people closer to it said that what had in fact happened was that as it circled to land, one of its wheels clipped one of the stone-built shelters on the hillside, and it went plunging down into a sort of glacial river. So that seems to be the cause of the accident, and as you can imagine, it has caused enormous shock across base camp and has really reinforced to a lot of the people here just what a dangerous place this is, because the air up here is so thin, it really isn't safe for helicopters to fly. A number of the people who were injured weren't actually in the helicopter, they were hit by parts of the helicopter as it crashed. And it was a really very unpleasant scene when I got over there. I suppose the only thing that could be said that was good was that there was another helicopter, an Indian Army helicopter, in the air at the time, which was very quickly on the scene and able to take people away. But it is extremely crowded here, and that's part of the problem, that there are a lot of people prepared to pay a lot of money to get away from here quickly, and these helicopter companies are willing to take big risks to come and get those tourist dollars and take people off the mountain. And I think that's part of the cause of this kind of thing, that people are prepared to do things that just aren't safe because the money's there and because people in this region just don't have that much money other than from tourists.
That was Jane Hughes on the helicopter crash at the base camp of Mount Everest. You're watching Asia Today. Still to come, the business news and, of course, sport. and how the Chinese government has responded to public anger over its handling of the SARS epidemic. That's all after this short break. Do stay with us.
In America, this horns gesture is a celebration, but in Italy, it would be rather an insult. Red here signals bad luck, for the player sent off at least. Red here in China is lucky. These envelopes contain money. At HSBC, we never underestimate the importance of local knowledge, particularly when it comes to your money, because what we learn in one country can directly benefit our customers in another. HSBC, the world's local bank.
Of Malaysia. It's the biggest cultural extravaganza in Asia. Let's celebrate together. 24th May to 27th June.
Introducing Intel Centrino mobile technology. The new wireless laptop technology designed to help you untangle, unburden, and unwire your life.
Welcome back to Asia Today. I'm Keshini Navaratnam. A reminder of our top story. In the latest step towards the improved relations, Pakistan has formally named its new High Commissioner to Delhi. He's the Foreign Ministry spokesman, Aziz Ahmed Khan. Now, a key witness has told a court in Indonesia that he was involved in the Bali bombings last year in which more than 200 people were killed. The man, known as Mukhlas, is one of 4 Bali suspects giving evidence in a separate trial, that of an Indonesian Islamic cleric, Abu Bakr Bashir, who is accused of treason. From Jakarta, Rachel Harvey reports.
A key suspect in the Bali bomb investigation arrives in court, but not as a defendant. Ali Imran is here to give evidence in the trial of this man. The radical Islamic cleric Abu Bakr Bashir, given a hero's welcome by his supporters. He's charged with treason and with authorizing a series of church bombings in December 2000. The prosecution says Abu Bakr Bashir is the spiritual leader of the extremist Islamic organization Jemaah Islamiyah. Inside the courtroom, a copy of the Quran held over his head, Ali Imran swears to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. Under intensive questioning, Ali Imran confirmed the existence of Jemaah Islamiyah and said he was in fact a member. Another witness, another chorus of cheers. It was Mukhlas's turn to take the stand. He's accused by police of being the operations chief of Jemaah Islamiyah. In court, he evaded direct questions about the group, often cracking jokes to deflect a line of inquiry. But then, a rash moment of openness. The bombings in Indonesia are not connected to Abu Bakr Bashir, says Mukhlas. We were inspired by our time in Afghanistan to carry out the last bombing in Bali. An admission under oath of his involvement in last October's attacks. And there was more drama to come. I know Osama bin Laden very well, Mukhlas tells the court. Did you get funding from him, asked the judge. No, comes the reply. Last, but by no means least, the alleged field commander of the Bali bombings, Imam Samudra, takes his turn. Allahu Akbar, chants the crowd. God is great. At the end of a roller coaster day in court, perhaps we know a little more about each of the 4 men called as witnesses. But it's debatable whether anything new has been learnt about the man on trial, Abu Bakr Bashir. Rachel Harvey, BBC News, Jakarta.
And police in Cambodia have arrested 3 men they accuse of belonging to an Islamic group linked to the Al-Qaeda network. It's reported that the group is Jamaat Islamiyah. The organisation Abu Bakr Bashir is alleged to lead. The suspects, 2 Thai nationals and an Egyptian, were detained on anti-terror charges at a mosque near the capital, Phnom Penh. Police say that the men had received funds from Al-Qaeda through Cambodian Islamic schools. Well, the global war on terror was the focus of Amnesty International's annual report. The organization's annual report says that the aftermath of the attacks of September the 11th has made the world a more dangerous place by curtailing human rights and shielding governments from scrutiny. It claims that human rights abuses have worsened during the past year in many Asian Pacific countries as governments step up repression of political opponents under the cloak of combating terrorism. Well, among countries specifically named were Malaysia, Indonesia, the Republic of Korea and Australia. Joining me now in the studio is Demelza Stubbings, Amnesty's Director of Asia Pacific Programs. Demelza Stubbings, welcome to Asia Today. Firstly, this inclusion of Australia, that surely came as something of a surprise, didn't it?
Not to those of us who've been following it closely. I think that the issue with regard to Australia is the so-called Pacific solution with regard to refugees and asylum seekers. But what that actually means is very, very broad measures that the Australian security services can implement to detain people on suspicion of having links to security-related issues. Of those who were detained and who have been investigated, not one of them has actually turned out in any case to have had those links. So it is linked to the way that Australia is dealing with what they regard as a problem of asylum seekers and refugees.
But it's not just Australia, is it? I mean, there's many other countries who also, according to Amnesty, appear to be using these anti-terrorism measures to actually curtail human rights and to use them for their own purposes. So what can Amnesty actually do to increase the scrutiny of governments?
One of the things that we're trying to highlight in this report is the people who've been forgotten. I think a lot of people just simply don't know what's happening and the reality of the situation in many of these countries. In a lot of cases, it's not even new legislation, it's old legislation that's been there for a long time, but under the rhetoric of the war against terror, governments are finding it very convenient to apply this legislation against their own domestic critics and opponents.
And you've been particularly critical of the situation in Afghanistan. I mean, you've criticised the international community really for failing Afghanistan, for failing to introduce law and order and for failing to substantially improve the human rights situation there.
That's correct. We actually have a field presence in Afghanistan working on issues of administration of justice. And the tragedy, I think, for Afghans now is that they don't feel secure. They don't feel that their human rights are guaranteed or protected. And yet there were so many pledges and promises from the international community after the end of the conflict and the fall of the Taliban. The international community promised enormous amounts in terms of assistance and support, but it simply isn't coming through fast enough, and particularly as soon as you get outside of Kabul. The law and order situation is truly dreadful in many areas.
You've been particularly critical of the United States, haven't you? I mean, in relation to the prisoners that they took in Afghanistan and the ones who are currently being held in Guantanamo Bay without trial.
That's right. If you look at Afghanistan, I think that there's an enormous irony that Amnesty International staff are welcome in prisons and detention facilities throughout the country, except the detention facility at Bagram, which is run by the United States. We have formally been refused permission by the United States to enter that prison. We don't know how many people are in there, neither does anybody else. They have no legal status, they have no legal representation, they don't know what's going to happen to them. Many of them are suffering in very difficult conditions, I think, but we're simply not allowed to go and visit.
Is there anything that you can do to exert pressure on the United States to actually improve the situation, to open access, perhaps?
I think that one of the things that would help is if everybody realised what was happening and more people were prepared to ask. Amnesty International, as you know, is a human rights movement. We've got more than 1.7 million members and they're asking. But people who feel strongly about this kind of abuse, and it is an abuse of human rights, need to speak up.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
This is Asia Today. I'm Keshni Navaratnam. It's time now for some Asian business news with Aaron Hazelhurst.
Thanks a lot, Keishan. Let's start in Japan, and disappointing first quarter results from Japan Telecom prompted their shares to drop by more than 10%. Now, strong growth in its mobile unit, J-Phone, did take the country's third largest telecom company back into profit, but it's warning there will be a 22% drop in group profit for the year, certainly due to the heavy capital expenditure on those 3G licenses and infrastructure. Okay, now creditors have applied to the courts to liquidate SK Global because that's the ailing trading arm of South Korean conglomerate SK Group. Creditors had earlier rejected an offer made by SK Group to contribute some $416 million to a rescue package for SK Global. Of course, SK Global has been in crisis since it admitted earlier this year to inflating earnings by more than $1.2 billion in 2001 to hide losses. And Russian oil officials are due to meet with the head of China's State Planning Commission on Wednesday, certainly to discuss plans for a possible pipeline between the two countries. Moscow has yet to decide between two rival projects, one route stretching into China and the other to the Russian port of Nakhorka in the Sea of Japan. Let's go and take a quick look at those Asian markets. I tell you what, a lovely mid-week session there, all up on the backs of Canon, Samsung Electronics. Comes after the US Consumer Confidence Index reached a 9-month high. New home sales also climbed in the world's largest economy. The Nikkei up 1.5%, so is Hang Seng. Now, Bombay, Indian tech shares led the broad market there. That was led by the rupee's recent gains against that dollar. And Taipei also up in the green. So, occasionally, all in the green.
You
nice
are
to see.
so happy, aren't you?
Why not?
Thanks very much indeed, Aaron. Now to the SARS outbreak, and the Chinese government's attempted cover-up of the SARS epidemic has been likened to the former Soviet Union's management of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. In both cases, public confidence was shaken over a major health threat. But has this impacted on the Chinese government and made it reconsider its stance? From Beijing, Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports.
The corridors of Longmei's apartment building are haunted by SARS. In early April, behind this door, her neighbours suddenly began falling ill. Within a week, 2 of them were dead. A few days later, her own husband fell ill.
When I learned my husband had SARS, I didn't believe it. And the health minister on TV said there were only 5 cases in Beijing, but there were more than that in my building alone.
It's not just the likes of Longmei who were angered by the way the Chinese government covered up the extent of the SARS outbreak. Here in Beijing, the streets were literally deserted for 2 weeks as the city's population fled home and locked the door. The government was suddenly confronted by widespread popular anger. Faced with this serious crisis of confidence, how has the Chinese government responded?
As only a one-party state can, with mass propaganda. The Communist Party has declared war on SARS. Its senior leaders are shown nightly on television news, visiting the front lines in this new war.
This is not new, this is old. We're seeing this in a similar respect in the new leadership at press conferences, forthright, outspoken, speaking frankly. But that's not structural change. That's not political change. That's all propaganda. I don't think we're seeing in this leadership a recognition that their system is at fault.
In place of reform, the Communist Party is turning to another tried and tested formula: nationalism. Here on the Great Wall outside Beijing, the fight against SARS is being turned into a patriotic campaign. The anti-SARS kite flying may have been a bit of a flop, but that's not the point. This is about building confidence.
We very much feel confident. Very soon, all of this SARS problem will go away.
That is of little consolation to Long Mei. She sits at home alone, waiting for news of her husband. He remains on the critical list.
SARS should be a lesson to the government, and the media shouldn't stay just a mouthpiece for the Communist Party.
But that's exactly what it continues to be. The crescendo of propaganda drowning out any question of the Communist Party's role in covering up the SARS epidemic. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, Beijing.
Now, it's time for the sports news with David Brenner. David.
Indeed, Katie, thanks very much indeed. There have been mixed fortunes for the Indian and Pakistan men's hockey teams in the Four Nations tournament in Perth, Western Australia. Thanks to goals from Dilip Tirkey and Gaganajit Singh, India got off to a perfect start. This is not the hockey caption, this is the tennis caption. Let's see if we can get the hockey caption up. First of all, Australia A were beaten 2-0 by India. There we are. And better news for the Australian team, worse news for Pakistan, is that Pakistan were beaten 3-0 by the Australian main team. But Pakistan did have their captain, Mohammad Nadeem, missing, plus several other players who were dropped for undisclosed disciplinary reasons. Well, now we do come to tennis, and news that Ai Sugiyama of Japan is safely through to round 3 of the women's singles at the French Open in Paris. One of the very few Asian players still in contention, Sugiyama went into the last 32, breezing past Sandra Klinova of the Czech Republic, the 16th seed, winning 7-5, 6-love. Well, it might be good news for his hairdresser, but David Beckham's ever-changing hairdo is proving a bit of a headache for the owners of the Madame Tussauds waxwork in Hong Kong. The statue of Beckham has been updated with his new cornrow hairstyle, which he wore during England's recent match in South Africa. The waxwork even has a plaster and a get-well-soon card after Beckham broke his wrist in the same game. There is a problem, though, because reports suggest the England captain has changed his hairstyle again, and the 6 hours it took to create this one may all have been in vain. Spooky.
I have to check out Madame Tussauds in London to see if there's the same attention to detail. That's it from this edition of Asia Today. More on the Everest celebrations in the morning. Bye-bye for now.
Get closer to the cutting edge of science. Get virtual.
This is my first chance to see what's underneath those bandages, and in 3D.
Get automated.
This robot enables Charlie to do a lot more exercise.
Get slimlined.
6 kilos, 2 kilos. So there are your layers. Wow.
Today's science fiction is tomorrow's world. At these times on BBC World.
The isolation. It is your mind that keeps you alive. The hunger, the thirst.
Perfect trail food. That's survival fishing.
It's so cold, so very, very cold.
I can sleep out in temperatures as low as -50.
What was that?
Anywhere along the water's edge, you're at great risk.
Never fear. Ray Mears is here.
Nice, dry sticks, which are perfect for friction firelighting.
Ray Mears Extreme Survival, part of the Voyager season. This weekend at these times on BBC World.
With more than 2,000 journalists reporting on worldwide issues, BBC News is next.
Introducing Intel Centrino mobile technology. The new wireless laptop technology designed to help you untangle, unburden, and unwire your life.
As events unfold, watch them live on BBC World.
For the first time since the war in Iraq, world leaders are convening for the G8 summit. With the fight against terrorism and the reconstruction of Iraq high on the agenda, stay abreast of the discussions, starting this weekend.
Follow the news as it happens on BBC World. In 30 minutes on BBC World, Hard Talk.
Iranian leaders warn the US stop threatening our country over an alleged nuclear weapons threat. President Khatami tells an Islamic conference Iraq will decide its own future. Amnesty International says the US-led war on terror made the world a more dangerous place. President Bush to meet Arab and Israeli leaders at 2 Middle East peace summits next week. 2 Sherpas killed when a helicopter crashes at a climbers' camp on Mount Everest. Welcome to BBC World News. I'm Nick Gowing. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei says the Islamic Republic will not bow to threats from the United States. He accused Washington of trying to strip Iran of its values. He spoke after US Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had mixed a confirmation that Iraq may have destroyed its weapons of mass destruction before the recent war, with a warning to Iran not to meddle in neighboring Iraq. Well, after making remarks that there is still no sign of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, Mr. Rumsfeld turned on Iran and said it now has a choice. He said any attempt to remake Iraq in Iran's image would be put down aggressively. Washington says Tehran is part of what President Bush has called the axis of evil. The US accuses it of harboring members of Al-Qaeda and of trying to develop nuclear weapons, claims that Iran denies.
The 57 member countries of the Organization of the Islamic Conference gathered for the opening session to hear the Iranian president call for an elected government in Iraq as soon as possible. All Islamic countries expect a political regime chosen by the Iraqi people to quickly take control, President Khatami said, and he insisted it was a demand supported by world public opinion. Democratic elections would be likely to put Iraq's Shia majority into power, a move which Iran would welcome, having sheltered key Iraqi opposition figures in recent years. The Syrian delegate stressed the need for broader representation.
It must be broadly presenting all spectrum, political spectrum in Iraq, all ethnic and religious groups.
Without naming the United States and British coalition, President Khatami finally called for the occupying powers to leave Iraq. The Americans had earlier warned Iran in strong terms not to meddle in Iraq's affairs.
Interference in Iraq by its neighbors or their proxies will not be permitted. Indeed, Iran should be on notice that efforts to try to remake Iraq in Iran's image will be aggressively put down.
The Americans have been increasing the pressure on Iran, part of what President Bush called the axis of evil, and accusing Iran of developing nuclear weapons. And American intelligence has suggested that the recent suicide bombings in Saudi Arabia were the work of Al-Qaeda operatives in Iran. Iran has asserted that it did not support Al-Qaeda. Tensions have been rising, despite attempts by some elements in both Washington and Tehran to improve relations. Jane Bennett-Powell, BBC News.
Well, the US Defense Secretary, Mr. Rumsfeld, also appeared to confirm the view of many, including former weapons inspectors and some politicians around the world, when he said Saddam Hussein's government seems to have destroyed its weapons of mass destruction before the recent war began. All suspected sites would still have to be inspected, he said, but so far nothing to match the pre-war intelligence warnings has been uncovered. The British Prime Minister Tony Blair is now in Kuwait, and he's expected to be the first foreign leader to visit post-war Iraq.
The Prime Minister set off for Kuwait, still the main base for supplies into Iraq, where he'll cement relations with the Kuwaiti royal family.